Now, the U.S. president has announced plans to suspend aid to South Africa, as well as tweak its trade relations worth $21.2 billion US, and that's the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. Well, that's the bad news. Now, the good news is that the World Bank has raised its growth forecast for South Africa to 1.6% on the recovery of the country's troubled energy and logistics sectors. And there is more to chat to. So let's bring on Chris Hart in Johannesburg. Chris is the Executive Chairman of Impact Africa Investment. A great evening to you, sir, and thank you for connecting to the show tonight. First time seeing you in the new year.
Yes, good evening, and as I say, I hope everybody has an actually great year.
Thank you so much for making the time for staying late this evening. There's so much to talk about South Africa at the moment, but let's begin with the crisis in DRC and the face-off with Rwanda. What's the latest on that right now from South Africa that we know?
Well, I think the Defence Force, the South African Defence Force, has to build up again. They suffered a defeat there last week, and that's because they were, the logistics behind the mission there was just inadequate, and it just seems like it's a very complicated affair. I think it looks like there's quite a bit of brinkmanship between South Africa and Rwanda. And it would be very unfortunate if the two countries went to war, because I think the whole point about the South African mission there is supposed to be peacekeeping. There is no real national strategic interest for South Africa specifically in that area, other than to be a Pan-African peace mission. And that certainly doesn't seem to be succeeding at the moment. That it's just a very complicated region to try and settle down, and it's been in turmoil for decades. And it seems to be going quite hot at the moment, and I'm not sure at what point things are going to cool. It's going to take quite I think, as a peacekeeping force, if it's for peacekeeping, they have to actually escalate the mission there to be peace enforcers rather than just peacekeepers, and that will require additional firepower and logistics air power, which was not there, during the fighting last week. It's, as I say, the whole situation there is not easy, and is likely to, linger on for some time. It's going to be a blight on Africa, because it's the one area that Africa was supposed to be sorting out internally. And we may have to look, broader, for more neutral forces in that area.
When you live in South Africa and with investments and all of that, are there concerns that the crisis in DRC with the neighbors within the SADC region, we very understand that there's a summit being put together to bring everyone to the table? Are there concerns what the economics, what the expected fallout of this Congo's East DRC's crisis could mean for South Africa? Looking at the problem in Mozambique as we speak, to the Northern Corridor, as far as the last presidential election is concerned, trade routes and moving goods around to Mozambique and all that is still being impacted. Are there concerns in South Africa within the business community on that?
I don't think there are big concerns. As I say, this conflict is miles away from South Africa. We don't feel it. It's really just to South Africa's prestige more than anything else. And when we then say, if we can't manage something in the DRC, how will we help in Mozambique, as you say, if that situation deteriorates there? South Africa does not have the armed forces, that can play a pan-continent role in peacekeeping. It hasn't invested enough in its defence force, and there's been a certainly deterioration in capacity with lack of maintenance of equipment, and this whole state of readiness of the South African Defence Force is not it's not up to standards at the moment. I think that showed in the DRC quite strongly, and unfortunately, the political leadership is not really qualified. The political leaders in charge have no military experience, and I don't think that's going to help in the short term. The South African Defence Force is quite top heavy, from a point of view of people have been promoted to, they're not necessarily on, career soldiers, but rather, for political reasons. And I think that's also helped dent the actual military capability of the Defence Force. But I think it was an awakening. I think there will be some renewal and some urgency behind the scenes to actually put something together. There's certainly, when that happens, the South African Defence Force would be quite a formidable force again in in the African context, and it really needs, I think, top expertise to get it back to that stage, which it doesn't have at the moment. But certainly, there's enough budget, etc., to actually get it back to combat readiness.
All right, so Chris, back to you. Just
Yes.
talking about Donald Trump. Sorry about that. Are you business executive investors and CEOs reading the tea leaves of President Trump's tariff hit at major global economies, Canada, China, Mexico, the EU most likely coming over the next few days or so?
Well, I think we need to appreciate that if there is going to be adversarial action between South Africa and the US, South Africa is a very, very small player, and it certainly doesn't have much firepower to resist what Trump is actually demanding. If one actually reflects internally, if we do see sanctions, I think there's over 600 US corporates operating in South Africa, for instance, in terms of job creation. I wouldn't say job creation, but certainly if they left, the job losses could be quite severe, and the multipliers that go with it, because the companies that are involved have quite strong and significant multipliers in the economy generally, and it is a problem. It's not that South Africa doesn't have much depth of reserves in terms of resilience for further deterioration. Our unemployment rate is already 33%, 60% youth unemployment. We can't actually go higher than that without real risk of the fabric of society falling apart. And that is the danger, is that it's not so much, even if America doesn't invest anymore, we can't lose what we've got, right, until there's a significant replacement. South Africa's saving rate has been deteriorating, so our own internal capital reserves aren't there. So there's a lot of political bluster and bravado that's being reflected, but we actually can't afford a fight. We actually have to come to the table, and we'd have to get to relent on some of the policies internally. If we do, it'll actually be quite positive for South Africa, because we need to start reforming for the country to be more competitive and take away some of the financial repression that's been imposed on the economy. That's one of the causes. The cause of unemployment has been entirely internal. There's been no external cause of inflation of unemployment. It's a self-inflicted problem because of over-regulation, over-taxation, corruption, the local empowerment laws. All of those things have contributed. Now we actually add a whole new slew of other measures which take the economy further and further leftwards in terms of a more Marxist, communist type of thinking that's being overlaid over the economy. It's a dead killer for the economy. This latest bill that's been signed into law, which allows for confiscation of not just land, it's property in general. In other words, intellectual property can be confiscated. It's moving property, vehicles, fixed property, all of that can actually be appropriated by the government if they determine it's in the public interest. And of course, when a politician talks about public interest, they actually mean political interests rather than the interests of the actual people as such. And we've seen this time and time again, and especially with a government that is so steeped in corruption and poor service delivery, do we want them to be more engrossed in the economy when in actual fact we need to be less? We need the government to pull back rather than to be continually intruding into the economy. And that is the big thing. I think the Trump factor is only highlighting this, that there's players external to South Africa that is now increasingly noticing. Well, it's, I think, been noticed silently, because we can see this by the fact that we're not attracting investment. But we're now seeing it being vocalized by external players. And of course, as South Africans, you want to be patriotic and immediately defend the country, because you don't like outsiders criticizing the country. But what is being said is true. You can't gaslight people. I think years ago we had a scandal in the Zuma household where they put a swimming pool in, and they tried to tell everybody that it's actually a fire pool in case there was a fire. Right? You might be able to get away with that for local politics, but that doesn't fly in international politics. You can't tell somebody that you don't intend to grab property when you actually put a law in that says zero compensation, for expropriation. It just doesn't fly. And of course, that affects investor confidence. Property rights are at the core of a modern economy and a prosperous economy. If you want to take prosperity away, you're going to actually go there. And even though we've got a legacy of apartheid, which was declared a crime against humanity, the current government is imposing an unemployment rate because it's a self-imposed one. It's imposed by government policy. It's not imposed by external factors. You can't blame anything else but ourselves on the reason that we've got the unemployment problem that we have, right? And the government is exacerbating it. The only thing, even without Trump's talking about this, investors will respond. You will not have investors coming in, right, where you actually are at risk of your property being expropriated, whether it's, as I say, whether it's intellectual, whether it's property, actual land or whatever, buildings, vehicles, whatever, can be, under this law, can be expropriated. If they don't intend to take it, they shouldn't have this law.
I'm sure there's a whole lot there to digest for those of you who are on the ground in South Africa with the law being signed in by President Ramaphosa. But let's see how discussions go with Washington and to address the key issues on the ground in South Africa, like you said, with or without President Trump raising a red flag on that, as it were. But the World Bank latest report was a strong growth forecast of 1.6% for South Africa. Looks like the energy and logistics sectors reforms is working. How exciting was this for you, business and investment circuit?
Well, I think it's great. We have had false starts before, though, with predictions like this, and I think the World Bank's prediction, is only being published now, but I think there's this latest law that's come into, that's been signed into law, is going to be a setback. There's no doubt about it, because nobody will want to invest in a country where you've got the potential of a property grab. And so we may well have this being a false dawn. If I were to go back, the energy sector, in other words, the load shedding, has been absent really since the second quarter of last year. And then all of a sudden, this last weekend, boom, we get load shedding again. In other words, it hasn't gone away, but the fact that we haven't had load shedding has helped with the stability of the economy and the ability for the actual productive sector to actually get on with it without interruptions from a power point of view. So that will have a positive effect on growth. But we've got to see whether there's momentum. We haven't managed to achieve a growth rate of above 1% for almost 2 decades now. It's almost like depressionary conditions, because the economy has never grown above the population growth rate now for, as I say, almost 2 decades. And that's, one can point to where it was, and that's really with the rule of law when the charges were dropped against Zuma. That's when we went ex-growth. So the fact that we don't have, that we've got a compromised constitution from a legal point of view, and now with the property rights, those two things are critical. They have to be fixed because a strong, prosperous economy has rule of law. In other words, if you have a contract, you've got to be able to enforce the contract, and if you own something, you've got to have the confidence you've got security of tenure, and you don't have the risk of it being stolen. And then the ability to associate and transact freely is another one where we actually need to pay attention. And that's so the World Bank certainly coming up with positive news, but the momentum needs to be backed by positive market and investment-friendly reforms, not Marxist-friendly reforms, which is what we've had. We've had a slew of them: the national health insurance, the education, the Bella Bill, and now this expropriation bill. Just a slew of a huge lurch to the left from an economic policy point of view, and that's with the government of national unity, where you would have thought maybe this would be restrained rather than going forward like this.
I'm sure there's a whole lot of ground. There are a lot of grounds to cover. It's a new year, so let's see how things begin to continue to pace out in the new year. We'll be touching base with you over there in Johannesburg. Thank you so much. Those are great insights from you as always. Some of the biggest headlines in and around South Africa at this time. Chris Hart, Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment.